So, as promised, a very, very short word on the PLUSS project. Between 2023 and we're nearing the end. The project ends in the beginning of January. We had an Erasmus project with, I believe, 7 different partners all over Europe collaborating and trying and testing new methods in how to make our queer sport clubs more sustainable, more inclusive throughout. There were many, many different parts of this project. There was an entire part of visiting each other and learning about how different partners work. There was an entire research portion of it done by the Deutsche Sportschule in Germany as well. We've done part of policy work where our dear partner Sportik will be talking a lot more on next week. But the most important part is we've tried and tested very many things in how to bring our clubs to a high level of inclusion, of governance, and that's the part that will help you. So we've built these community guidelines based on everything we've tried out over the last couple of years. So Uitvoering and Sportiek, 2 Belgian clubs and organizations work together to write these community guidelines. Now, what are these community guidelines that we're making all this stuff about? It is very much a practical toolkit. It is not the beautiful story with a bow that just is a story and you can't do much about. We really try to make it as practical and as implementable, as actionable as we could. And I think that's the strongest point of what we've created here. I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. Did I need to catch that?
No, there was a participant that was unmuted, but I saw that. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. So this practical, actionable toolkit based on our experiences that are both for the very, very small clubs that are starting up, as well as the very big ones who have been established for quite a while. And these guidelines we've made in a very easy to remember acronym, our game plan: governance, advocacy, membership, and events. I'm sure some parts will directly speak to you as in, oh shit, we really need to work on this. I don't know if I can cuss on here. My apologies. But in others, you'll think, oh, we already got this. We're good. But these all work together. So I hope everyone gets something out of this tonight. So there's the game plan, but I'm working in reverse tonight to make sure there's attention to everything. Events and activities. This is a showcase of what you do. I know everyone starts from organizing activities and everyone will organize events as well. But these are the moments that show what you're about, how you organize. And when applied effectively, it really can strengthen your club as well, and not just be what you do. But for all the details on that and how to get started, please download the guidelines. I'm already going to promote that, and I'll show the QR code a couple more times tonight. But this is a showcase. It doesn't start from here. This is where it all comes together. And then I think the biggest or the most struggles our different partners have had over the last couple of years was mostly about membership and volunteers. So what we understand with membership is any person that is in any way related to the club or the group, if it's not formalized yet. Whether it's from just getting enough members to be with more than the founding partners, or to really engage members to become volunteers, or to even take a board position in that, or the partner who drops off their partner for a sports event. It's all possible, and they're all members in that sense. As most struggles were with the volunteers thing. We're very, very happy that we can announce Lou, who is going to speak on this a lot more from their experience with as a founding partner of Bright Sports UK. And they've been active in so many different areas of sport. We're very, very happy to announce that they'll talk a lot more on volunteers and working with volunteers tonight.
Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everybody. Good evening. Noswaith, as we say in Wales. I'm just going to talk to you for 20 minutes. When I was asked to talk this evening, I was asked really to address the struggle that clubs have with recruiting and retaining volunteers. So what I'd like to talk about this evening is the difference between kind of LGBTQIA plus sports groups and sport volunteering and mainstream sports volunteering. What differs in our motivations? What are some of the additional issues that we face as the LGBTQIA sports sector? Sorry, and how that affects supporting and retaining volunteers. And then finally, just to kind of talk about what I think is our superpower in terms of the queer sports sector. So just generally, when we talk about mainstream sport, a lot of research has been done across Europe around what the motivations are. Why do people get involved in sports volunteering? So one of the most mentioned issues is parents. So parents getting involved, parents of children who are participating in sports club and wanting to help friends and family out by getting involved. So that's one of the kind of real key engagement points for the wider community. And then next up we have, and these are kind of in order of influence. So next up we have kind of enthusiasm or your passion for sport itself. Followed on then by like social benefits. So, you know, meeting people, giving something back to the community, you know, either to the sports community or to the community where you live. Learning new skills and also pride in helping a club do well. And then finally, to if you're a bit old like me, to remain involved in your club. So to, you know, beyond participation, you know, how do you remain as part of that community? So what I would say is that for LGBTQIA plus people, there are some differences in our motivation. So the first one we look at, if we look at parenting, for example, as a way of people getting involved in sport, we know that only 18% of LGBTQIA plus adults are parents, compared with 43% of the population as a whole. So as a community, we are less likely to get involved in sports volunteering than the population as a whole, plus the fact that the majority of us are volunteering in clubs that are for adults only. And then the second thing, I don't know if you can remember back to my first slide, but the first slide talked also about kind of passion for and engagement in sport. And yet one of the things that we know is that LGBTQIA plus groups participate in sport, in organised sport, much less than the wider community. And various pieces of research have been done, both in the UK, where I'm based, and in other parts of Europe, show that LGBTQIA plus groups describe kind of high school sports experiences very negatively, and that's particularly amongst gay men and people in our research that we've done in the UK, particularly amongst pansexual, asexual, and queer people. In the UK, there's also growing evidence that non-binary young people really, really struggle with school, sport, and physical activity. And then these same negative experiences in school then have a really destabilizing impact on participation later in life. So again, the LGBTQIA plus sports sector can be really impacted in terms of recruiting volunteers when actually many people in our community are very averse to organised sport and to sports clubs, to sports organisation because of these early experiences. So as I said, less participation in formal sports clubs. And we know from research that's been done in the UK, research that's been done in Spain, there's also amongst LGBTQIA plus people, less attraction to competitive environments. And these things do have an impact on the willingness of the wider LGBTQIA plus community to engage in sports clubs themselves and to see that as a place for volunteering. The wider community is much more likely to be attracted to other forms of LGBTQIA plus volunteering opportunities. So then I thought I'd go on and look at some motivations for volunteering from people that I've either volunteered with at Pride Sports or the Football versus Homophobia campaign, or people who we've had contact with as an organisation. And let's see what they say. So the reason I did that, the reason I volunteered was purely that, and this is quite selfish. If you learn something knowing you've got to teach it to other people, then you learn it better, which I thought was fantastic. You know, somebody being really, really clear that that their kind of drive to become a coach was to excel. I came here, there was no gay sports club, and I thought, let's change that. And then one thing led to another. So was I doing it for community? Yes, I was doing it for community, but I was also doing it for me. So we see a lot of that as well in the sports sector in the UK, that people move from locality to locality, particularly if people move from a large city where there's a lot of provision of sport to maybe a smaller city or a town where nothing exists, and their needs that are not being served themselves, so then they become initiators of sport. I could see firsthand the impact that providing inclusive sports spaces had on marginalised people. Knowing that I was contributing to cultivating and sustaining a space that genuinely has saved multiple lives over the years, that provides LGBTQIA plus people with glimmers of joy every week, is incredibly fulfilling. I love being able to give back to the environments which have given me so much. I volunteer with a sports club, I guess mostly for selfish reasons. It makes me feel much more part of the group, the club, the community, than if I had simply attend something. It allows me to have a say in how my environment is shaped and how I can put my own stamp on something and shape the way the club is run, which I think is really interesting when I reflect on the information that I was sent through from AMO about autonomy and the desire of LGBTQIA plus volunteers to be autonomous and have ownership for their work, but also to have a sense of belonging and an identification with the club mission and values. One of my colleagues at Football versus Homophobia says, I started volunteering with Football versus Homophobia because it gave me the opportunity to connect with other people who shared the drive to make football a better place, and also because I believe it makes sense to build on top of existing good work. So Thanks, thanks to that volunteer for that. And then the last two quotes I've got is, what motivated me was the fact I could see a massive gap for trans people and people who said they'd like to swim, including myself. Now it's that I can see how much it means to people, people who keep coming back and who look forward to it, and people who come for the first time and say how amazing it is to be in the water again after years. So again, somebody seeing something that they would like to participate in themselves, but also the impact of that on the kind of wider community, and then becoming motivated by that need. And then finally, and this was just a quote that somebody sent me through today, which I thought was really interesting and a bit different from the other quotes that I'd been given, that where somebody said, I volunteered to give back to the sport that's been so good to me over the years, which I thought was really fascinating. So we can see, you know, there are really diverse reasons that LGBTQIA plus people become involved in running sports groups. But one of the kind of big threads through that, I think, is community and the development of community. And I'll come back to that at the end. In terms of kind of retaining volunteers, I think the ways that LGBTQIA plus groups differ from mainstream groups is that, you know, generally they're underfunded and under-resourced. Maybe they're not affiliated. So actually the money coming into grassroots sports groups in the LGBTQIA plus sector is really limited. So there's limited time to manage volunteers, to support volunteers, you know, to really keep that communication going, to be there and keep people interested and inspired. And then on top of that, I think there are another couple of kind of key issues. And one of those things is the kind of mental health and well-being of the LGBTQIA plus community. So in a range of research that Pride Sports has undertaken over the years, we know that mental well-being is absolutely critical to our community, and much more so than the wider community, particularly as it relates to sport and physical activity. And we need to acknowledge that as a community, we have additional stress, and that's because of prejudice and discrimination, experiences of rejection, pressure to conform, and then concealing kind of our identities. And that's one of the most amazingly liberating things about LGBTQIA plus sports groups, is that we can be ourselves in those environments. But that does not mean that we don't attract people who are experiencing additional pressure around mental well-being. And in fact, during the COVID pandemic, we undertook some work with Nottingham Trent University, and they found that during lockdown, the support that club leads and club volunteers were having to provide for other participants was absolutely huge during those 2 years. In addition, research is now indicating that neurodivergent people are more likely to identify as LGBTQIA plus than their neurotypical peers. So when we're thinking about volunteering, we also need to think about different ways that people work. So, for example, a volunteer that volunteers for us was telling me this weekend about they have ADHD, and they were telling me that the way that they are able to deliver as a volunteer is if the project is in the forefront of their mind, and so that if I want them to engage, I must help them keep the project at the forefront of their mind, which I thought was really interesting, and something that I've definitely taken away from that conversation. So yeah, so diversity of thinking, diversity of the way in which we deliver, acknowledgement that people with different neurodiversities may be more suited to different roles than other roles, and not pressuring people to be all things to all people, which in under-resourced LGBTQIA plus sports groups is it can feel like a pressure. And then finally, just for this bit of the talk, and I'll stick around to answer questions later, I think the thing that is truly our superpower in terms of the LGBTQIA plus sports sector is our community and the motivation of our community and the opportunities that gives people. So young people who typically explore volunteering because it adds to their CV, they can gain skills and experience, it helps them kind of like move on with their lives. Also, the LGBTQIA plus sports sector provides them with opportunities to explore their identities, and that shouldn't be undervalued. Older people wanting to continue to connect with community. For them, the LGBTQIA plus sports sector can be a fantastic place to be without some of the pressures of the kind of commercial scene, if that even exists anymore. People who are newly arrived in communities. So, for example, in Pride Sports, within Pride Sports, before we've worked with LGBTQIA plus asylum seeking organisations. At Pride House in Birmingham, we had a number of volunteers who were asylum seekers who volunteered their time for us every single day that we delivered a Pride House over 2 weeks. But also people who aren't necessarily migrated, but maybe, as I said before, people who've moved towns, who are looking for new connections and looking for community where they go. And then finally, LGBTQIA plus people who don't enjoy the scene, who want that connection, but maybe who don't want to go out to bars, or maybe who don't want to go out to club nights. That the sports community can provide an amazing place for those people to connect with others and find community. And if I had more time, I'd go on to talk about, how we've got such a huge job on our hands to promote the opportunities that we have, how we can sell our volunteering in a way that doesn't always focus on the sport, but focuses on the needs of potential volunteers and what they can gain from volunteering. But I've finished my 15 minutes. I mean, I'm beyond 15 minutes. I'm on about 18 minutes. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, you should see my screen again. Thank you, Lou, so much for that very honest and open talk on your personal work with volunteers. I particularly love the testimonies of the volunteers. Really shows that no matter whether the intention is for themselves or for the sport or for other things, they're all heroes in capes, or maybe not capes, no matter the intention. So really, thank you for that. And of course, if anyone wants to keep reading on membership, already on members, what worked, hasn't worked, and the role of allies, please download the guidelines. Further in our game plan, we've already had events, we've had membership now, thanks to Lou. Advocacy, I mean, it is the core of what Out for the Win does, so I have to stay like a couple of minutes with that before we can move on to governance. But the idea of advocacy really is to stand up for an idea or a cause, using different strategies to influence how people think, decide and act, no matter their position of influence. And what I really mean with position of influence is no matter how what their social position is, whether they are in power or not. It can be just within your small community, or the people you surround yourself with, both in a club but also at work or in a sports club. But at the same time, it can be with the policymaker or with literally whoever. And we all see it's essential to keep or gain queer rights or LGBTI plus rights. But it's also a way to, as a sports club, a way to gain access to resources, recognition, and to collaborate with mainstream sports clubs as well to really strengthen both of those. Outfooting started as a way of storytelling, but it's not the only way to really do advocacy or do it well. But we've all written that out again in our guidelines, but also in a very practical way. What are first small steps to get started with it? Because it usually seems just like an extra task we have to do that mainstream sports clubs don't have to. But also, how can it really help build your club to be bigger and stronger? It's all about small steps that can make a big difference, and it doesn't always have to be the greatest thing ever to be able to build. But then I really would love to talk more about good governance. One, because I love it, but two, could we have another fantastic speaker on it today with us? It's also something, good governance, that we all know is important. Like, we know we should have a framework for how we get things done. But usually the first questions that we get when we talk about it is, but when should I do this, or how should I even get started? So I'm very honoured that I get to introduce Eloise from Leap Sports Scotland. Again, a club that works towards inclusion and is against discrimination for people in sport and physical activity more generally. And in her role, Eloise works on national campaigns, including Football vs. Homophobia, just like Lou did, but also runs community projects and is in an advisory role for different grassroots sports clubs in Scotland. So I think you'll all find her talk very, very interesting, and now I'm happy to give the word to her.
Thank you so much, Amo, and thank you, Lou, as well. I'm going to share my screen also. I'm hoping that you're seeing a presentation there. Is that great? Amo's giving me the thumbs up, and I hope you can all hear me okay as well. Yeah, I'm going to be talking a little bit longer than Lou, just giving some tips around good governance for grassroots sports clubs. I've come today from Leap Sports. So as Amo said, Leap Sports is a Scotland-based organisation. We do lots of things. We work in community groups. We do kind of policy-related work, but a lot of what we do is also supporting the development and ongoing sustainability of grassroots LGBTQIA plus sports clubs. This is in a Scottish context, and I want to kind of acknowledge right now that my experience and understanding is in that kind of Scottish and UK context. But I'm really hoping that some of the things that I talk about tonight will be helpful and transferable across. So I'm going to talk about three main things around good club governance tonight. So first of all, I'm going to talk about kind of creating community within your club, something that Lou touched on as being such an important part of why we do this. I'm also going to speak about managing finances, not everyone's favorite part of running a club, but very important. And then I'm going to finish up talking about sustainable structures. And there'll be a lot of stuff that builds on what Lou was saying in that bit, because I'm going to be talking about sort of engaging membership and working with volunteers and things in that part as well. So in terms of creating community, just a little overview of what I'm going to be chatting with you about. I'm going to start with speaking a little bit about safer spaces policies or codes of conduct, why they're important and some tips there. We'll go over some of the community committee roles, that might be involved in community building. Also about how to have a democratic approach and how to engage your members in socials and communication as well. So in terms of a safer spaces policy, so this is something that can feel quite intimidating, I think, for clubs and committees, especially as committees are usually, you know, volunteers. Not everyone always feels like they have the authority to be making these kind of things, but we would say it's always better to have one than not have one. You're the expert in your club and what your club needs, but you can also engage with your club members, ask them what helps them feel safe and helps them feel included, and build a policy really based around the needs of your clubs and the people that are involved in it. But we would say definitely do try and make one. It is a really important thing to do, and it'll really put things in place for you later on in the committee as well. We would say that a policy should be of this kind. So a kind of safer spaces policy should be a working document. So something that is malleable, something that you can edit and change. It might be that an issue comes up in your club that you hadn't thought about, but is really important to create guidelines around. So you want to be able to edit that policy, add things in as is appropriate as your club, you know, as things come up in your club. And with that in mind, we also suggest that it is kept separate from your constitution. So you can reference it in your club constitution. You know, you can mention that you've got a safe spaces policy and how it works, but we would keep the actual content of the policy separate. And that means that you can edit and change it a lot more easily. It doesn't have to be voted in every time a change needs to happen. Helps keep it as a kind of working living document in that way. When you're making your code of conduct or safer spaces policy, it's important to consider all aspects of what your club does. So obviously everyone here is a sports club, and a lot of the activity that we'll be doing will be sports and physical activity, but you might also be doing socials. There might be other platforms where people communicate. So try and think about all of these different aspects of the club and how to make sure people feel really welcome and included and safe and happy in all of those different areas. And another thing that's important to be considering when making a safer spaces policy is having real clarity around what happens if there is behaviour in your club that is inappropriate, if someone is made to feel unsafe, or someone's well-being is being significantly impacted, or if, you know, there's a breach in the policy. It's really important to have a clear structure of what actually is going to happen in those cases. So some kind of disciplinary procedure. And again, you know your club best and what would be most appropriate, but it could look like different stages of, you know, you might initially speak to somebody who's behaving inappropriately, give them a kind of warning, go over the policies again with them. But depending on how serious or how often that's happening, you know, there could be different types of disciplinary procedure that you go through. I wanted to give some examples. I'm not going to go too much into these, but of different policies. So I'm just going to change my screen so that you can see them. Can you see a different screen now than the one you were seeing before? Great, thank you, Amo. So these are just some quick examples of different codes of conduct or safer spaces policies. So this one is from a football club. I wanted to highlight it because there are some nice things in here that are really specific to the LGBTQI plus community. For example, about educating people around pronoun use or about making assumptions. There's some things that are really based around kind of social behavior and being clear about what is and isn't acceptable there. And this club has also thought a lot about the different platforms that are used as well. So like different apps that are being used and considering, like I mentioned, the different all the different aspects of the club. And this is an example too where they're asking people to kind of sign and tick that they've read the policy. So that can be quite a good idea to make sure that your members have definitely read it, or at least say they've read it, so that if you do need to speak to them about it, that's easy to refer to. The next one I wanted to show you is a running club that we have in Glasgow. This policy, one of the interesting things about it to think about is that they have a whole section that's quite specific about the sport itself, so how to stay safe whilst doing the actual sport. So that might be something you want to think about, or if you're a multi-sports club, you might want to think about that in terms of the different sports that you do. And this policy is also quite interesting as well, because what this club has done, if they've written their own policy, but what they've done is kind of tagged it onto the wider UK athletics code of conduct for their sport. So that's something else you can go and have a look at, different codes of conduct that might exist already for your sports, and see if you can add in the things that are relevant for your club and relevant for the queer community to those policies. And the last example I wanted to give here, this is actually a safe space policy from a football league that is very, very inclusive of the queer community. So this isn't a club, but it's a league that runs with lots of queer inclusive clubs. And this league did a really great consultation with the community. So what they did was reach out to the community, ask the different teams about what it was that would make them feel included and safe within that space. And they built the policy really out of that consultation. And that's a really nice way to start if you're not sure how to start with these things. And the other thing is, on this page of this policy, you can see there's a really clear laid out exactly what happens if the policy is breached or if behaviour is inappropriate. And that really helps people feel much safer as well in a space if they know exactly how something's going to be dealt with, not just what isn't appropriate. So those are just a few examples of policies, but there's so many different ways you can do it. But please do try and do one if you haven't got one already. Coming off that, speaking about committee representatives who help build community, one of these would be having a membership rep. So this person does kind of administrative work regarding membership, so keeping the record of club members, but also does a really important job about communicating with and welcoming new members. So if you're trying to reach out to new members or be a really welcoming club, having someone whose job is really focused on that can be really, really helpful. And as well as that, we'd recommend that you have some kind of safeguarding representative, or you might call this a well-being officer. And this person would handle issues around behaviour and breaches of any safer spaces agreements that you have. So this wouldn't be as much as an everyday role. But when things do come up, it's quite a high responsibility role, and it's a really important one to have in place. Considering that it is so high responsibility, I think it's a really lovely idea to have more than one safeguarding rep so that that person can share that responsibility and can work together with other people. It also means that members of your club have more than one person to go to with issues. So they might feel a bit more comfortable with one person than somebody else, and that can be nice to give them the options. And as well as having more than one safeguarding rep, I would recommend that this role is also something that has a lot of wider committee support. So although it's the safeguarding rep's responsibilities, and they might be the person who's kind of addressing the behaviour or enacting some of the disciplinary action, the wider committee should be involved in discussing how they want the club to proceed in those cases. And something to mention whilst we've been talking a lot about safeguarding and well-being is, as much as we want to create lovely communities and really, really support the members of our club, we do need to be sure that we've got clear boundaries and we have a real clarity about what the roles of our clubs are. A lot of these sports clubs, sometimes members will ask for things that might not be appropriate for the club to be supporting them with, especially if it's a volunteer committee that might not have experience or the right knowledge to be supporting people with complex issues. So including what the club can and cannot give for people is also actually very useful. It keeps everybody really safe, and it means that the committee aren't handling as many issues that they're not actually prepared to deal with appropriately. Another thing that's really important for creating community in your club is trying to have a democratic approach to how you run the club. So we want everybody in our clubs to feel like they have ownership over the club and like they're really part of the community and that they can have their say and feel heard. So we'd advise that you consult with your members on the decisions that affect them, and this might be really casual, like just asking people what they think about things at your sessions, or it could be more formal. For example, you can make online surveys or do polls, or even set up working groups for people to discuss certain issues, or have specific meetings that you invite club members to discuss issues. But making sure that the members feel like that they're part of decision making is really important. Also having a kind of annual general meeting. If you're a constituted club, this is something you have to have anyway, but it's a great thing for bringing the club together and showing everybody what you've done over the year and what's happening for the year to come, and getting people involved in that sense of ownership of the club. And it can be a bit hard to get our members to attend such meetings. It's not always really the reason why people are there. So sometimes it's nice to include a kind of social alongside the AGM, just to encourage people to attend, because it is really important to have as many people there as possible. And finally, on the kind of democratic approach, we recommend, using platform, some kind of communication platform or community channel where you can manage activity, so that everyone can see what's happening all the time, even if they're not able to come along to all the sessions. They are kept up with what's happening within the club, and communications of what's happening. And the final point about building community is kind of the most obvious one. Just make sure that you're having fun in the club and that you're helping people to bond and make those connections. So obviously we're all doing sporting activity, but it's also great to have regular socials that aren't to do with the sports that we're running for people. So doing other things and having other ways for people to bond and connect with each other. You could combine this with the sports activity that you do already. So you do your activity and then you go to a cafe or to the park or something and spend a bit more social time together. This is also a really nice way to include people who might not be able to engage in the sports for whatever reason. So people who may be injured or other members who are non-playing members at that time. It means that people still feel connected to the club, and that can be really important for membership retention too, that people feel part of a community beyond just the activity that you're doing. In terms of socials, it's also quite nice to offer not just alcohol-focused things. Obviously, I'm not trying to tell you how to have fun with your friends and your club, and you can do whatever you want, but it is a bit more inclusive to have some socials that aren't just focused around alcohol. For the different members who might have different experiences with alcohol. And I sort of talked about communication platform in the last slide, but it can be quite nice as well to have a different communication platform for like social activities and social communications and just chatting with each other, than the one that is more about organising fixtures or organising the sporting activity. So that might look like two different apps. I know in the UK, a lot of clubs use an app called Spond, which is free and really, really useful for organising sports things. And then they have kind of a WhatsApp or something similar for more social stuff. But you can also use different channels in WhatsApp within the same community or whatever works for you. But it's quite nice to just, keep the work and play a bit separate and make sure that it's really clear which communication goes where. So that's a very whistle-stop overview of kind of some ideas about building community. The next part is I'm going to chat about managing finances. So I'll go over a little bit about the role of a treasurer on a committee, about record keeping for finances, some thoughts about financial sustainability, and also about being financially inclusive as well. So the treasurer oversees the club's accounts. They make and receive all the payments on behalf of the club. So, booking pitches or buying equipment and taking in donations from members or fundraising payments. They also really importantly do the kind of financial planning and make recommendations to the club committee. So they keep on top of how the finances are looking in the club. If there needs to be a boost in some fundraising, they need to raise that with the committee. If maybe they think that the club needs to cut back on spending, these are the kind of things they need to be raising with the committee. And that transparency should be extended to the wider club too. So every year at the annual general meeting, they should present annual accounts of a report of the incomings and outgoings of the club from that year and how things are looking for the club going forward. And a couple of tips around being a treasurer for the club. Don't use a personal bank account. This can make things really complicated if the treasurer changes, or sometimes it's just difficult because it's not as official as using a kind of club account, if that's possible in the countries that you have. To have a free club account, then that's brilliant. Also funders, if you can get grant funding, often need it to not be a personal bank account as well, at least in the UK. And the other tip around the treasurer and bank accounts is if the treasurer changes in your club, make sure that you change the name on your banking as soon as possible. In a little bit of a serious note, if means that if anything untoward happens with your banking, so if someone isn't behaving appropriately with the club money, or even might be behaving illegally with the club money, whatever name is on the bank account will be liable for that. So whoever is in charge of the finances really needs to be the name on the banking as well. That's important. And another very important part of being the treasurer is good record keeping. So this really helps you to plan for the future in your club. It makes you understand what kind of money comes in when and what kind of money goes out when, so you can plan year on year. It's often also asked for by grant funders who want to be able to see what kind of financial records you have. It ensures that transparency that I talked about before, both with the committee and the wider club. It's really easy to share what's happening with the finances with everyone. And for record keeping, most of the clubs in our networks have quite low turnover and relatively simple finances. So using something like Excel or Google Sheets can be the best option there. Google Sheets is useful because it's very, very easy to share with other people, but Excel works as well. If you've got higher turnover or kind of more complex finances, you might want to consider accountancy software, but sometimes you have to pay for that. So it's about weighing up whether it's worth it for your club, but it can be very helpful if your finances are more complex. And in terms of sustainability financially, there's lots of ways to get money as a club. Lou mentioned, queer sports clubs are really underfunded, but there are things you can do. So there's fundraising, member donations, grants, sponsorship. Sponsorship, it could be a local organisation that you use regularly as a club. It could be an organisation that one of your members works for that they've asked whether they could get sponsorship for them. Sometimes sponsorship is a regular payment, but sometimes it's also for something specific. For example, like a local cafe sponsors your kit and then you've got their logo on your kit as well, something like that. These are sort of, you can reach out to organisations and ask for sponsorship. Your own fundraising is often quite a fun part of the club because it can be a very social activity and it can be a really nice way of bringing people together. So you could do parties, quizzes, games, things where people pay ticket prices to come in, shows. A lot of the clubs also in our network run sports tournaments as a way of fundraising where they invite other teams and those teams pay to take part. And that's really nice for building connections across teams as well. And one tip around fundraising is if you are lucky enough to get a big whack of money, either you get a really great grant that comes in or you do a really successful fundraiser, we would recommend that you keep taking the donations from members if that's what you do, or keep your ongoing fundraising happening, because a big whack of money does dwindle and it's really important to try and safeguard the future of your club. So keep going as you have been going would be our recommendation, even if you manage to get grants and things. Financial inclusivity is also a very important thing if you're able to do it for an LGBTQIA plus club. Research shows that cost is a really significant barrier for LGBTIQ plus people to accessing sport. And the costs of sport, there's the really obvious upfront costs of training and of games, whether that's pitches or coaches or whatever the club might be paying for those. But there's all kinds of other costs as well for engaging with sport. There's buying your kit and equipment. There's getting to and from games and sessions. Also things like childcare costs, if you need childcare so that you can attend something. So there's a lot of different costs involved. So if we're thinking about financial inclusivity, try and think quite broadly about that. And another thing to really be keeping at the forefront of your mind when thinking about financial inclusivity, if it's something that you're wanting to embed in your club is just ensuring the dignity and confidentiality of the people who you might be supporting in your club. So some examples of doing that would be try and keep things as self-identifying as possible instead of making people kind of jump through too many hoops to access money or try and prove the need for it. And also thinking about who needs to know which members are being supported. So I'd suggest potentially only the treasurer needs to know those names, maybe the membership rep, but really considering even if the committee are discussing something together, their confidentiality of the names might not need to be shared. And some examples of what I mean by financial inclusivity. I've got an example, 3 Glasgow football clubs here as examples of kind of different levels of financial inclusivity that you can do. So Cathkin Blazers Football Club runs all their sessions completely for free for absolutely everyone who attends. And they also have a wellbeing fund, which anyone can access, which can be used for things like kit, equipment, travel, all covering the cost of training and games. And that's just, if somebody asks for it, then the money gets sent to them. So this is obviously kind of trying to be as completely financially accessible as possible. The drawback of this is that it's very reliant on grant funding, which isn't a surefire thing, and also means it's quite a lot of work for the club. They have to apply for big grants and quite a lot of grants all the time, or do really big fundraisers. The next example, the next kind of level down from that is Glasgow Pride Community FC, who have a self-identifying pay what you can model. So this means that members who can afford to do pay. Some members might pay some, but not all of the costs, and some members come for free. And that's just self-identifying. Members decide what they can afford and pay that. So it means that they are still getting money from membership, but there is partial reliance on things like fundraising and grants still. And the last example here is Saltaire Thistle FC, who have a pot of funding available for people who need it. But in general, they ask everybody to pay the same amount to access the club. So they get membership donations kind of as a standard. But if someone asks them or requests it, then the club can cover some things, and that is given at the committee's discretion. So the committee will get together, discuss what's been requested, and decide whether to fund that person or not for whatever it might be. And this is just a little example of the pay what you can model that Glasgow Pride uses. So there's different levels to it, and it's kind of based around things like lifestyle, giving people a suggestion of what they might pay. And this is just decided by the people, no one's kind of chasing it up. Yeah, it's just what people want to send into the club account. And finally, I'm going to talk about sustainable structures. So this is the section where I will talk a lot more about the things that Lou spoke about earlier and build on what Lou said. So I'll be talking about engaging members, trying to engage members into volunteering and maybe into committees as well. But also I'll be talking about running the committee in a way that feels sustainable for people, because burnout is a big problem. So yes, I'll be talking about committee structures. I'll talk about different kinds of volunteering, different levels of responsibility, a bit about harnessing new energy, and also about resources around you and how to rely on those. So I'm sure for a lot of you, this will be very familiar, but in the UK, the way that committees work is that you have to have at least a chair, a secretary, and a treasurer. But then there's all number of other positions that you might have on your committee, and that will be totally dependent on your club and what's appropriate for the kind of activities you're doing. So you might have some roles that are really specific to sport itself, like club captains, fixtures secretaries, coaching coordinators. You might also want to have roles that are really socially focused, so a social secretary or the membership rep. And also things to do with inclusion, so like the safeguarding rep or wellbeing officer, an equality officer, child protection perhaps, if that's relevant for your club. I mean, the list of optional roles really goes on and varies from club to club. One thing that can be useful for committees is thinking about how the committee can be divided up into subcommittees. So this is an example from a rugby club where there's, some of the committee members are more on the sports side and some are more on the club operations side. And these groups might get together and, work together separately from the wider committee meetings and perhaps just send a representative from their group to the wider committee meetings, and that can be helpful for just people's time, especially as a lot of people are volunteers. Subcommittees might also start up just based around certain issues that come up, or maybe certain events or fundraisers that are happening. So you might have something where you've got a really structured committee, but then you've got these subcommittees that come up and then disband again after whatever it is has passed. So these are ways that people can kind of get involved without dedicating all of their time or dedicating a little bit less time, which can help with burnout. And similarly, it's really nice to have different levels of responsibility or different volunteering options for people, because there's lots of people that might want to get involved in the club, but they're not sure how much time they can give or what responsibility that they can give. But it's really nice to keep members engaged in the running of the club and feeling that ownership that we talked about earlier on by having some kind of lower level ways of getting involved in volunteering. So, for example, you might be running a fundraiser event and you can reach out to the club and say, can people help out on the night with things like on the door or making some food? These are things that are kind of one-offs or maybe short-term bursts of volunteering, and that can be a really nice way to engage people. And also it means that people are more likely to step into those committee roles because they've already started engaging and giving their time to the club in those smaller ways. Embedding a culture of help and support in general in your clubs will make a huge difference to retaining volunteers and to getting people to join committees. So just thinking about getting everybody in the club to help clear up after training or help moving equipment around. These are kind of really small things, but it's about creating an environment in which people feel ownership of the club and feel like they're there to help and kind of be supportive of everyone else in that space. And that really, really does help lead into volunteering and committee roles. And again, I've kind of mentioned a lot of things about communication channels, but it can be a good idea if you've got a range of volunteer roles that are a bit more ad hoc. So volunteers who are doing things here and there and less responsibility, for that to be a different kind of communications channel than the committee communications. So it means that they're not then feeling the pressure of the kind of decisions that the committee are having to make. And it also means that if there are confidential conversations that a committee needs to have, that's easier to keep separate. So coming off of that, harnessing new energy from new members is really important and something that we see clubs struggle with a little bit sometimes. So one thing to do is if new members join the club, make sure they know right from the beginning that there is a committee, that the committee are their teammates, their friends who are also involved in the club, and that there are also other volunteering opportunities for them to get involved with as well. So if they know from the beginning that that's an option for them, it really helps them think differently about how they can get involved. You might even think about creating new roles for new members, giving them the opportunity to help out and feel ownership right from the beginning of joining the club. I've popped at the bottom there about identifying skill sets, but if somebody joins your club who has a certain skill that you think would be really useful, reach out to them, be really proactive about asking them specifically, wow, I can see that you're really great at like social media, for example. We would really find it helpful to have your skills involved in the club and really reach out to them based on those skill sets that you've seen that they have. Delegation is really important, making sure that a few people aren't holding all of the work of something. And that's one of the ways to help delegation. And another thing that you can think about in terms of harnessing new energy is consider having a built-in turnover for your committee, and particularly for your chair or chair people if you've got more than one chair. for example, a 2-year term or maybe 5-year or whatever works for your club. But we do quite often see really successful, really well-run clubs don't last because they've been set up by a couple of people who then hold all of that energy and all of that work really until they burn out. And if you've got a built-in turnover of a chair, then people are leaving that position and new people are coming in before that burnout stage. And it's also a bit easier for people to think about taking that on because it's like, okay, I can do this for a couple of years. It gives that, it's a bit easier to imagine yourself doing it and to step into that role. So it could be something to consider. It can be really helpful for the longevity of clubs to have that built-in turnover. One example of harnessing new energy here is the Raptors Rugby Club. So they have an annual boot camp every year, which is a series of sessions that are just for new members. So this is a really, really nice way of making things not intimidating for new members and being really welcoming to new members, having these new member specific sessions. And then those new members are really encouraged when they join the club properly to help in the small ways that all the members do. So the things I've talked about earlier around building in that sense of help and support in the club. So making food or cleaning up after training or supporting at fundraisers. And then often the Raptors have seen that these members who came in at boot camps end up joining the committee quite quickly after being part of the club. And the final thing that I want to end on this evening when talking about kind of being sustainable in the way that you run your clubs and in your governments is about using external resources and not feeling that you have to do absolutely everything yourself. You know, most of the committees in the clubs that we work with are volunteers. In fact, pretty much all of them are. And they're people who love the sport and love the community and have ended up on a committee. So we can't be expected to know everything. We can't be expected to know how to deal with really complex things that we don't have any experience of. And that can feel really daunting and stressful for committees. And complex challenges do lead to burnout quite often in clubs. So there's a couple of ways that you can use external resources to help with this. One is to seek out advice as a committee. So if you're handling something complex within the club, for example, some maybe complex interpersonal behavioral things, try and seek out advice from people who are experts, who do know exactly what they're doing around that, and make sure that you're not feeling like you have to figure it all out on your own, and you can ask that advice and build that into how it works in your club. And the other way that you can use external resources is to signpost your members. So there might be some things that actually, as I mentioned right at the beginning, your club really actually shouldn't be handling. It's not actually safe and appropriate or really the remit of your club to be dealing with. But you do want to support your members. So having other organisations that you can send them to who are the right organisations to be supporting them in those ways can also be really important. And knowing when something's for you to handle and when something to be signposting is a key part of running a club. So I would encourage you all to consider creating a list of the resources that you have in your area, even if things haven't come up yet for you. Really consider what the members of your club might need, the kind of stresses that are in your club or in your club membership. So that might look like a list of mental health support services, advocacy services, LGBTIQ plus specific organisations, disability support. I know clubs have needed to signpost for things like housing support. There's all kinds of things, and you know your members best. But try and create that list so that if something does come up, you know where to turn and you've got that already built in. And another really useful external resource is peer support from other clubs. So if you have good relationships with other clubs, or if you can be put in touch with other clubs by organisations like Out for the Win or other kind of umbrella organisations, that can be really helpful because a lot of clubs really come up against the same challenges all the time. And people have already had those experiences, so they're able to really share what worked and what didn't work for them. It can be really invaluable to ask one another and get that support. But of course, it is important to mention that if you are doing that, just maintain the confidentiality of the people involved. You know, we're not creating gossip when we're getting peer support. So just making sure that's done in a sensitive manner is really important, but it can be really invaluable. And I think I'm going to pass back to Amo so we can have questions for me and Lou at the same time. But that was a lot of information. I hope some of it was helpful and relevant to your clubs.
Thank you so much, Eloise, for that very clear overview with some very practical hands-on tips and examples. And also for thinking of all the different ways that governing might be creating an issue or not. That was very comprehensive. Thank you so much for that. In the meantime, while I have once again shared my very beautiful QR codes to download our community guidelines. Not that I'm pushing anything. No, I am. I'm very clearly am. So please, if you want to get started with any of the topics that we just briefly or less briefly addressed on governance, advocacy, membership, or organizing events, please go through them. I hope there was at least some element that really struck a chord that you feel like, oh, maybe we could work on this. And then I'm happy that we could share that. Whether you get started or want to build further on that club, I think there's something in there for everyone. My closing thoughts are not very much. It is late, and I'm very thankful that you're all here. But no matter where your club is starting or building from now, every step that you take is one that counts. So don't get lost in the big vision that you want to work towards. Rome wasn't built in a day, like they love to say. And I also really want to thank you all for your presence today, but mostly for the work that you do day to day on top of your lives that you're leading as well. So, are there any questions that you still love to ask me or the representative of EGLSF, thanks to who we were able to carry out this project, or one of our wonderful speakers? The floor is yours. What else would you need to be able to take the first steps from here on out?
Thank you very much, Amo. Before giving space to questions from the participants, I would like to take a screenshot of the audience here this evening. And for that, I would like you to open your camera, and Amo, if you can stop the presentation for a moment. And so think about a question, switch on your camera if you can, and answer to a super short survey that I just shared in the chat. And meanwhile, I would like to thank Amo, Lou, and Eloise on behalf of EGLSF for this enriching webinar. And as it was mentioned before, I would like to invite all of you to a second webinar scheduled for December 2nd from 3 to 6:30 Brussels time, where we are going to highlight policy change and institutional approaches to inclusion. And I'm going to share right now with you in the chat also the registration link where you can also find the agenda of the webinar. Okay, so maybe it's not copied correctly. So just one more second with your camera open, and so I can take a screenshot. Okay, thank you very much. And the floor is to questions, please. Go ahead. Raise your hand or go directly.
The person from Sabea Titanium.
Hello, my name is Bella Titanium in the sport. I am trying to start up a club since many years, but I don't have much support in that. So this was actually extremely educational for me. Like this was like a lot of information that I could use to put down the structure to get started. The main reason why I want to do this is because I live in an area where there is nothing for professional sporters, for the real hardcore, dedicated performance sporters. And I want to fill that gap up. But inbuilt in that, I want to have inclusion for diversity because I myself am an intersex athlete and it is extremely difficult to find anywhere to go to sport. Like I'm actually like I do strongman. I don't know if you know that it's like extreme strength sport, and many times when I try to go to a competition or something, it's, oh, we don't have that. You can join the men's or the women's, but we don't have anything else than that. So choose whichever you fit in the most, and we'll see if you can join us. And then I try to qualify for it. And usually when I qualify, it's, oh, we can't put you in the women's. You go with the men's because you look more manly and stuff like that. I want to get rid of all of that with starting my club, and this stuff is like it's so much information that I can use to help with that. So I'm really thankful for this presentation and for like all the information that you guys shared. That's really helpful for me.
I'm very thankful that you shared that just with us. Makes me happy that the work is at least with someone going to be continued. And good luck with strongman competitions. That is not an easy sport, so congrats to you.
I will try to organize my own because there's nothing for me in the regular field. So yeah, again, more for this.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I do actually have a question, but I was not finding my hand. But if it's okay, I will just speak out. I was just wondering, I'm working for Sportiek, and we are basically working for the regular sport context, the regular sport clubs, the regular federations. And they often say they want to work on inclusion, but I'm pretty sure if I would present what was presented today, that they would be really like, oof, that is very much or very far going, or how to say, like they're like, whoa, do we need to do all of that? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that would be the direction. Like, what would be your recommendations for the regular, like, what is like the main thing they should start with in order to then go towards being really as inclusive as you are doing in your day-to-day work? Because I think that's where we need to get to, but it needs to be step by step. And I was just wondering if you would have any suggestions on what is like the main or the first thing they should do. I don't know if Eloise or Lou want to comment.
I think Lou will have a lot more to say about this than I will probably, but I think that the things that really immediately came to mind for me when I think about how we support members of our community, one of the things would be about just staff training, so that the staff that work in the facilities or work in the clubs understand the community and understand the community's needs and understand about, you know, how to make people feel included and not feel discriminated against. So that initial, you know, face-to-face contact that people are having in sports facilities and in clubs is really important. And the other thing that came to mind is the facilities themselves. So obviously maybe a lot of places aren't going to say totally make everything gender neutral. Like that would be amazing if that happened, but that's not necessarily going to happen. But even at the level of having some private changing room spaces or spaces where people do feel more comfortable some gender neutral toilet facilities, things like that. So the actual, we find in the UK, I mean, I don't know if Lou would agree, but I think sports is quite behind in the way that its facilities are so gendered. And yeah, these are kind of two things that really will help people feel more safe and included, and remove some of those barriers right away. Leo, I'm sure you've probably got things to add.
I suppose just to add to that, a couple of things. Like the first thing is language. You know, it's kind of in endless research. You know, LGBTQIA plus people are asked, you know, what the issues are for them in sport, and you know, like 20 odd years. Oh my gosh, yeah. After the first kind of study in this area, you know, people are still saying the same thing. So there's something for me there around language and challenging language. And we talk a lot about safe spaces, but actually we can't always guarantee people's safety, but we can guarantee accountability. So making sure that spaces are accountable, so that if people use homophobic language, there are, you know, or transphobic language, there are sanctions for those things. And then I think the other thing, and these are definitely additions to what Eloise has said, is, you know, there's been some research done that says that asks kind of like queer people what they want from mainstream sport. And one of the things that the researchers found was that queer people are much more interested in the welcome that they will get, you know, in a sports session than they are by any amount of qualifications somebody has as a coach. So, you know, one of the things that we say at Pride Sports constantly when we're working with the kind of mainstream sector is that you need to really focus on that welcome, because, you know, it's the first impression that people get when they come to a session, walk into a sports centre, can make all the difference to somebody's ongoing participation.
Just to jump very quickly back in again, coming off what Lou was saying, that accountability is really important, and having really clear reporting structures, which is something that I talked about in terms of governance of a grassroots club, but it's really, really important for these mainstream clubs, for people who are using those spaces to know that if something happens, what they can do and what will actually happen. So a real clear structure of how to report if an incident occurs, and feeling supported, like genuinely supported from those reports, can be very important as well.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful as well.
I'll leave the floor open for still a couple of minutes. But if at any point you decline the call and you think, oh, I really wanted to ask this, please don't hesitate to still shoot a mail where the invitations came from, and then we're happy to reply afterwards.
If I can also add to the previous things, one of the biggest hurdles to get into sports to begin with for LGBTI people is mostly the can I participate question, like at all. Like, can I walk in here and do this thing? And if your club doesn't have anything that signals, hey, welcome, come in, you can ask us this question, people will most likely not try. They will not go over that hurdle to even ask.
Very accurate observation. Thank you for adding that to the conversation. Okay, then I think we can slowly end this meet. I'm very, very thankful that you're all here and that you stayed with us till so late.